What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before I jump in, as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. Good show in store this week. Gonna talk a couple developments from the last 48 hours or so, and then a full kind of Premier League season in review. We got some awards to hand out, some teams to announce, and a look back on some of the things that I talked about at the beginning of the season and evaluating what I got right and what I got wrong. That will all be coming up. First, though, couple developments to attend to, as I mentioned. First of which is Sevilla once again winning the Europa League, continuing their perfect record in the Europa League final and their dominance of this competition overall. Not a particularly great game, although Roma did show some ambition early, and so you thought maybe we're not going to get a total Jose Mourinho final here. And ultimately, Paulo Dybala comes back. He's healthy enough to start. He scores. Roma looked good in the first half. No issues defensively. And you think they're just going to park the bus and probably get another 1-0 Jose Mourinho victory in a European final. However, you get some halftime substitutions from Sevilla. Suso in particular made a massive impact. They were much more dangerous in the second half. They were able to get their fullbacks, and specifically Jesus Navas, farther up the field and kind of to the end line, put in some dangerous crosses. One of them ends up in an own goal, and Sevilla just got more and more dangerous as the game went on and really were in control for most of that second half, which is not what you expect from a Mourinho team. After those first 45 minutes, they really did not kind of have things under control defensively. And so Sevilla get their goal, could have had a second. Both teams had claims for penalties. I was very happy with the way that all played out. I think ultimately they got both those calls right. And so you go to extra time and nothing happens except for the little scuffle involving Mourinho. More yellow cards are handed out. It seems like every Roma player and coach had one by the end of this game. And eventually this ends the only way it can end, when the unbeatable force meets the chosen one in a European final, which is a penalty shootout. And it is Sevilla, obviously, who prevail. Gonzalo Montiel. Talk about a 6-month period for him. He converts the winning penalty in the World Cup, and now, after missing the first one and getting a second opportunity, converts the winning penalty kick to take this Sevilla team into the Champions League next season and to win a Europa League title. Congratulations, Gonzalo Montiel. Doesn't get much better than that. And look, there's not much to break down in this game. It was about what you expected. Yes, it's interesting that Roma had the game plan and it went the way Jose Mourinho wanted, and Sevilla found a way to fight back and kind of mess that up in the second half. But there's really just one thing I want to get to here. And that is the manager of this Sevilla team, Jose Mendilibar. Trying to figure out how to pronounce his name. I believe that is how you do it. Mendilibar. Jose Mendilibar, before this run, had managed one game in a European competition, if I did my research correctly, and that was as manager of Athletic Bilbao in the Intertoto Cup. I believe they lost to a Romanian team. I don't remember off the top of my head who it was, but it was not a high-profile team. And Mendilibar has made his career basically, trying to get teams promoted from the second division, trying to prevent teams from getting relegated from La Liga. And that's what he walked into at Sevilla. This was a team trying to avoid relegation. Don't forget how badly the season started for him. And you got a couple higher profile managers, it doesn't work. So they turned to Mendilibar, and not only does he do the job in La Liga, they're comfortably mid-table, not a great season, but nowhere near the catastrophe it could have been. And now he's got him in the Champions League too, and he continued the proud history in the Europa League. And to do this is the other part of it that's fascinating. Think about this. To make this happen, this Sevilla team, managed by this guy again, who has made his living with teams that you don't pay attention to. And quite frankly, I don't either, for the most part. He had to go and basically no European experience before he got this job. One game, if I'm doing my research correctly. First up, Erik ten Hag. Right? Champions League semifinal, seconds away from a Champions League final. Max Allegri, Champions League finals. So the level kind of goes up, right? Champions League semifinal, Champions League final. And then, of course, you get the ultimate test in Jose Mourinho, who is the only person alive to have won all 3 European competitions. And makes his name in moments like this and games like this. And Jose Mendilibar's team prevailed. There is something about this competition in Sevilla. But this was not your typical Sevilla team where they have a good season. Either they're dropping into this competition from the Champions League, or they, were the Spanish team that qualified for it, finishing 5th in the league or whatever. And you go, yeah, maybe they're not the best team in the competition, but you certainly like their chances of hanging in there. And obviously they got some kind of magic here. This is not that at all. This was a rescue mission. Because it didn't go well in the Champions League, and it wasn't going well in La Liga. It wasn't like this was the Sevilla teams of past, where you just knew they were really good. They can give teams difficulty. They're great in this competition. They just turned into that team by the end of the season. And Mendilibar deserves an immense amount of credit for that. It's a terrific story. And so I don't want that to get lost in this, Sevilla won the Europa League again. Yes. The other ones weren't like this, though. The way that this season has turned around is remarkable. And now they've got all of these good vibes, this momentum, this confidence heading into next season, where they're going to be back in the Champions League. And on the Roma side of this, they're not going to be in the Champions League, obviously. There's no door open. The question is, which European competition are they going to be in? It's probably going to be this one again. I'll get to that in the weekend roundup. But it's also just kind of this question as we begin these European finals of what do the Serie A teams do? This was probably the best shot. Because West Ham is a better team than Fiorentina on paper. And obviously Manchester City is the favorites in the Champions League. You got 3 teams there into the final. Half of these spots in the final are taken up by Italian teams. I made this point in my 5 things from the week. It's a big deal. It's a great step. You had a great opportunity to win one here. This is probably your best opportunity and you didn't take advantage. It's just kind of another thing to think about as you get ready for these other 2 finals. Because now you're going up against 2 Premier League teams. And I know West Ham haven't had a good season, but this is everything for West Ham. This is their season. And it has been for a long time, especially once they kind of turned things around and made sure they weren't going to get relegated. This is about, coming so close last season in the Europa League and not getting the job done. Now they have another opportunity. It's a lot of pressure on Fiorentina in terms of trying to go up against that. And obviously, Inter have their work cut out for them too. So it does change the story a little bit if all 3 of these teams lose, as opposed to if 2 of them won or something like that. Obviously, 2 can still win. The bigger story here is what Sevilla did and the fact that Jose Mourinho conceded a goal in a European final for the first time in 20 years and didn't win, But there's also the kind of the broader Serie A context to think about as well. Ultimately, Sevilla going back to the Champions League next season. Terrific turnaround. Congratulations, Jose Mendilibar. Phenomenal story. Not a great game, but ultimately it provided entertainment in the end, in probably about the only way a Jose Mourinho Sevilla Europa League final could. The second thing I want to touch on before jumping into Premier League stuff in segment 2 is the coaching change with the U.S. men's national team. Anthony Hudson has stepped away to take a job reportedly in the Middle East. I haven't actually seen what club it is yet. I don't know how many people actually know. There just seems to be reports that it's the Middle East. BJ Callahan is in. Does it change all that much? No. You're about to go get the squad for the Nations League as you begin this summer. There was never supposed to be a manager in charge of these competitions. So the question was, essentially, would Anthony Hudson stay? And from Anthony Hudson's perspective, if you're going to continue to work on an interim basis, and turn down opportunities, you've got to at least feel like you have a shot at this job. Because otherwise, you're just turning down long-term job security instead for a 2-3 month stint here that really isn't going to do much for you at the end of the day anyway. And you've already done a fine enough job. So he had no reason to stay if clubs were coming calling, and he was not convinced he was going to get a real shot at getting this job on a permanent basis. And the U.S. Soccer had no obligation to give him a real shot. This is just the risk that you take, is that it's just kind of this thing. He's just sort of been there operating on this interim basis. And so, club seasons end, teams make coaching changes, he gets an offer, and he takes it. I don't think it changes all that much in terms of these competitions this summer. The other talking point here, of course, is why don't they just hire Jesse Marsch? Why is this taking so long? And again, I want to remind everybody this was always the plan. And to go back to this point I have made before, you get, theoretically, one shot to pick your manager for your World Cup at home with this squad essentially in their primes. You get one shot to have the appeal of offering somebody the opportunity to manage a World Cup on home soil with a team with a bunch of guys in his prime. You have got to cast your net as wide as you possibly can and go see who is interested. Make the calls, make people tell you no. And this window here, now that club seasons are winding down in Europe, is your only opportunity to do that. This is when pretty much everybody is on the table. Right? Jose Mourinho is not having this conversation before the Europa League final, just as an example. Do I think he's taking the job anyway? No. But now would be the time to ask that question of him. If you just go hire Jesse Marsch, you're denying yourself that opportunity. The other part of this is, are we sure Jesse Marsch wants this job above all else? Because that is a different question than will Jesse Marsch take this job if it's offered to him. You've got these links to Monaco now. he also has to decide that he doesn't want to be a club manager and have that day-to-day operation. So he might need some time to go also see what is getting offered to him right now and decide whether he wants to accept one of those jobs or turn them down in the hopes of getting this one. I do think that part of this is getting glossed over a little bit. To me, Jesse Marsch is not somebody who is just going to say, forget Europe, forget the opportunity to manage in a top 5 league. I want the U.S. job. Not that he won't take it. I still do think he's the front runner. But you got to let this play out, and he also needs to do his due diligence and go see what kind of opportunities he might have. Because the downside to hosting the World Cup is you don't have qualifying. You are sacrificing from a coaching standpoint. You are sacrificing a lot to have that one incredible opportunity to manage on home soil in a World Cup. Because there just isn't that much going on in the next 4 years. Yeah, a tournament here, there, Copa America, but it's not a consistent, and the pressure of qualifying, the ability to kind of simulate that high intensity environment, all that stuff isn't there. As opposed to working with players every single day and having an opportunity to, potentially qualify for a Champions League, qualify for a Europa League, something like that. So that is part of this too. I'm not convinced Jesse Marsch is just sitting there waiting for the U.S. to call him, 100% sure that's exactly what he wants. I don't think this is as big of a deal as some people are making it out to be. There was, not much the U.S. could do to convince Anthony Hudson to stay. To me, I don't see much that changes with the coaching transition here. And I am all for keeping the original plan in place. Now you start doing your interviews. Now you start making your calls to see who you have. Narrow down your short list. Jesse Marsch should be on it unless he tells you no. And then you make your decision, which was always the plan. This doesn't change any of that for me. We just have somebody different who is already part of this coaching staff overseeing this for the next couple months until the next person comes in.